You're listening to CinePunked, interactive discussions for film lovers. I'm your host, Robert J. E. Simpson.
We're back here at in the Watershed Theatre. What's the theatre? How they call it?
The Watershed Theatre
back here in the Watershed.
Glorious Bristol city.
During the Slapstick Festival.
Yes, 2020.
Yeah, just for
version.
context, listeners,
Yes.
those of you here. And I'm sitting with, well, a friend of the show already, Robert Ross.
Hello, Robert.
As I saw you describe last week, the official historian of British comedy.
Well, yeah, it was a weird thing because my passport is writer, but I've been sort of billing myself, or other people have billed me as Britain's foremost comedy historian. And now on my social media, I've had some sort of banners made with me with various sort of comedy luminaries. And somewhere in the edit, it wasn't my doing. Somewhere in the edit, the foremost has been dropped. So now I'm just Britain's comedy historian, which I sort of like. It's basically I own it.
So anytime we do comedy stuff, we either have to reference you or we have to ask you in to do it. That's how it's going to work, clearly, for the rest of you.
I prefer being asked to come and do it, because I enjoy doing the CinePunked stuff. So yeah, absolutely, fun.
That said, you know, the reason that we're having this conversation is not the reason that I thought we were going to have this week. It's to talk about Terry Jones.
Indeed, and the late great Terry. I never thought well, of course it was coming, but it was still a shock when he sadly passed away. So soon after Ninnis, of course, and also I always, again, when I'm talking about Terry, have to mention Nancy Lewis, who people probably don't know, but she married the actor Simon Jones from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and Nancy was an American who worked at Buddha Records, which was the sort of the American branch of Charisma Records. And she was a massive sort of Python champion. And without Nancy Lewis, they wouldn't have got such wide exposure on American TV, and you know they wouldn't have been the massive global phenomena that they are. So Neil and Nancy in December, and of course Terry Jones just a few days before this festival kicked off. So it was. Very sad. I mean, the one lovely thing about it is just the absolute outpouring of love for him, and I'm not saying a bad word about him in any press report at all, and quite right too, because he was an absolute sweetheart of a man. And it's I think I hate to mention the Daily Mail, bastards, but I think the Daily Mail of all the nationals. Well, I think I said this before, but when someone of great importance in terms of sort of cultural phenomena dies, I tend to buy all the newspapers. So I did that with Peter Cook, I did it with George Harrison, I did it with David Bowie, and I did it with Terry. And the only, I think, that I got, the only national newspaper that didn't put him on the front was the Daily Mail. so don't buy the Daily Mail is my remit from that.
Well, but, I think it's good advice for life.
It's
anyway.
good advice for life, exactly. Yeah.
Just don't touch
but
it.
No, particularly not. But it was, you know, and as you know, I knew Terry for a long time. I've known him for 20 odd years. So it was a sad old day. But you know, he hadn't been very well for the last few years. So it was inevitable to come, but when it came, it's still a shock.
You did say yesterday that he was someone who had a lot of friends. And
absolutely. Well, if anybody saw the Michael Palin on the BBC News, with David Sillitoe, their arts correspondent, Mike's equally beautiful human being, and obviously he's known Terry for nearly 60 years. So they met at Oxford University in the early 60s. And if anybody saw his beautiful, moving tribute to his fallen brother, it was heartbreaking. And Mike very beautifully did say that, you know, he had a lot of friends, and he did. I mean, it was a sort of case that sometimes I met Terry because I was writing a book in the late 90s called Monty Python's Encyclopedia. And all of them helped. Even sort of Graham's spirit was in there, helping from the back. But the other five, the living five, were very helpful, but none more so than Terry J. And it was sort of thing because he was the archivist of Python, really. So he had all the scripts and with all his annotated notes, and he had all these sort of like the floor plans for the studio at the BBC, and he had everything. He kept everything. Wow. I mean, so he invited me around to his house. He lived in Muswell Hill in those days, with his first wife Alison, and he invited me around to his house. And what started I think he said, I can give you an hour. And what started as an hour of just rummaging through his sort of filing cabinets. When you were with Terry, a really good bottle of Rioja would come out, or he introduced me to this lovely white wine called Pitbull, a French white wine. Bottle of wine would lead to another bottle of wine, and what was supposed to be like 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 1:45 in the afternoon, I was there till probably 3 the next morning, and then there was just a group of people. People were just like satellites around Terry Jones, because he'd order in some Indian takeaway, and then there'd be somebody else would come around from next door, with something, and then before you knew it, he was just like playing records or singing songs or playing stupid games in his back garden or something, and it was always a sort of party with Terry. It was an amazing sort of organic friendship, really. And then you sort of forgot that you were with the person. I would always joke with him because those really stupid sort of futile top 100 comedy film polls that they do every so often invariably has Monty Python's Life of Brian at the pole position. And I would because he obviously not only did he co-write it, also acted in it, but he directed it as well. And I would sort of sometimes after a few bottles of wine sort of like poke him in the ribs and say, that makes you the greatest comedy director of all time, Terry. And he goes, no, Rob, that was Buster Keaton. Because he was always so humble about his achievements. But you would sort of forget it was him. You would forget it was Terry Jones, bizarrely, because he was so knowledgeable and so affable and so sort of erudite in his conversations. You talked a lot about politics. We shared similar sort of views on politics. And he would talk about, plays and Disney films and he wasn't much on sport particularly, but everything else he just had an opinion on and a really interesting opinion. And we would just sit in the pub for hours just chatting. It was just some of my happiest times. Just there's a pub called the Red Lion and Sun because when he moved out of Muswell Hill, he moved to Highgate Village. Near the Gatehouse. If people know their North London locations, the Gatehouse is a really good boozer with a sort of little theatre atop it, and he had a nice big house around the corner from there, and we'd meet in particularly the Red Lion and Sun around the corner. And if I was late or he was there a bit before me, there'd be a pint waiting for me, and a big hug, and we'd just sit and chat all evening. It was just happy times, really was. So. Yeah, I will miss that. But like Mike said, Michael Palin said, that's what he's going to miss. He was a real hug of a man, Terry, and he just was very sort of very humane and kind. Plus, possessed of one of the greatest comedy minds of the 20th century. So it was quite nice to be brilliant and also lovely. Not many people can achieve both of those things, but Terry certainly did.
It's a great testament, I think, to the man himself. I think that's something that has come out in sort of the comments that I've heard this week and that I've read from his colleagues and friends. I guess part of our job as film historians, comedy historians, is to sort of also look at the work, which is obviously how you got to know him in the first place.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was lucky. I mean, off the back of the Python book, then we met up again. What was it? Oh, 99, that's right. 99 would have been 30 years of Python. So the book came out in 98. I sort of tried to get in just under the wire before the anniversary. So the book did really well. It was my second book I'd written. I did the Carry On book first in 96. And then it wasn't called the Carry On book. It was another book. Mine was called the Carry On Companion, to clarify that, in 96. Then I did Python in 98. And they did a big bash at the Leicester Square... the Empire Cinema, Leicester Square, and they screened Monty Python's Life of Brian. And if memory serves, I think 4 of them were there. I think it was Terry G, Mike Palin, and John Cleese, I think, were the 4 there at this big sort of 21 years ago now, celebration of that particular milestone. So I saw him in the pub as well after that. And I think that was one of those times when I went round to his house and then got, completely blotto and ate a lot of Indian food or something. And that same evening, actually, ironically, this going back to this Forgotten Hills of Comedy project, that was that night, I think, when he got all his 78 RPM records out of Will Fife and Max Miller and all these things. We were playing those until dawn, I seem to remember. We had this wonderful sort of It seemed about 6 foot high, but it was a floor standing sort of 78 RPM record player. And he had all this he came almost like something out of a cartoon. He came with this pile of records. I thought, my God, he's going to drop these. It's a precious thing he's had since he was like sort of 17, you know, all these records. And he was just playing one by one. You won't know this guy and this sort of thing. And that was how the Forgotten Heroes of Comedy project came about, because he played a record by a guy called Ronald Franco. I do this in my live show. I tour the world doing Forgotten Heroes of Comedy. It's a book and it's also a show now. And he played Ronald Franco. And he said, you won't know Ronald Franco. And I did know Ronald Franco because of a record my dad had. And we sort of, you know, and he said, oh, you should do a book about that. Forgotten Heroes of Comedy, I'll do the forward. And that was that project. But then it just, you know, just we kept on sort of meeting up. And it wasn't even work then. We did a few other things. We did the DVD audio commentary for Personal Services, which he directed, about the life of the famous Madam Cynthia Payne. So he did a commentary for that, whenever that was. Oh gosh, early 2000s, maybe 2002, 2003, we did that. But we would just meet up, so phone or email or something. Are you free, you know, next Tuesday to come around and have a bite to eat and then go to the pub? Yeah, okay, great. And it would happen that sometimes if I was in London for a meeting in the West End, I'd phone Terry that day if he was free. And he'd say, oh, yeah, come up. So it became a non-work thing. We did do work together when it called us both together, but it was a social thing. And him, you know, being quite impish and knowing, you know, I'm in the very fortunate situation, Robert, to be writing and celebrating stuff I absolutely adore and have always loved since I was a kid. And Python was one of my passions as a kid. You know, my dad would let me stay up late to watch the reruns on TV and stuff. And Terry was aware of my sort of love of Python. So sometimes, without telling me, I'd be sat in, let's say, the pub, the Red Lion and Sun, or one of the pubs around there, the Gatehouse or something. And we're chatting away, and after about an hour, Terry would say, oh, you don't mind this, I've got some friends coming. I said, oh, it's all right, you know, whatever. You know, sometimes it was just me and him, sometimes it was a whole group of people. And I'm sat there, and then I just, you know, have this hand on my shoulder, and I turn around and it's Michael Palin, you know. And then half an hour later, Terry Gilliam turns up, and you think, I'm sitting here with half Python, you know, this is ridiculous. So if I could go back and tell that 15-year-old self that one day you'd be sat in a pub, and again, not talking about comedy, just talking about anything, talking about, you know, the political situation that was happening in that time. So it was quite surreal sometimes, but it was quite apt for Monty Python. I mean, you know, it was fun and silly times.
In terms of his work,
yeah,
I've often felt that Terry goes underappreciated. You know, it was one of the things I like yourself, when I got asked to do a bunch of obituaries for the BBC this week, and one of the things they kept on saying to me was that, you know, he was the one that people didn't recognise, and I get that. I mean, he's the one that didn't have the big Hollywood career afterwards. He wasn't always in front of the camera. No. When he's doing something like Ripping Yarns, he's quite happy to take a back seat and let Mike do all the acting.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think the thing with Terry was that he never wanted to be a comedian particularly. He was always a writer first and foremost in his head. He was a creative person. I remember him telling me once that he would have probably been happier just to have been like a Don at Oxford, sort of, and to be wallowing in academia for his life, and to be looked after, you know, to have a fag to bring his tea around in the afternoon, and just to sort of like study medieval history or something. He loved that. He loved. There was a point, I think he said to me, that he was in the Bodmin Library doing some research, where he thought, I want to be writing my own stuff rather than writing about other people's stuff. But he did love that. He loved history. And he loved the creative process. So I suppose that in a weird sort of way, I mean, I see what some people's point is, that he never had a Fawlty Towers, for example, or he never had a Ruttles like Eric and Neil did, or he never had Around the World in 80 Days like Michael Palin did, or I understand that. Even to the extent of Graham Chapman, he had, you know, projects that weren't always successful, but like The Odd Job Man or Yellowbeard, those sort of things. He had an identity, and obviously he died very young. He died at 48. But Terry was an academic. He really was. So he wrote a wonderful book called Chaucer's Night, which sort of deconstructs Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in the 1970s. And because he was, as I said before, the Python archivist and also the Python director, the first film was a sort of cobbled together. They reshot some sketches, mainly for American audiences. It was a film called A Now for Something Completely Different. So that was a sort of a reheating of particularly sort of Series 2 Monty Python sketches. But when they did Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which Terry's handprints are all over that in terms of history and everything, and him and Mike wrote great swathes of that. But he shared directorial duties with Terry Gilliam on that one. When they got to Monty Python's Life of Brian, it was just Terry Jones, and he also just directed Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. So he was the one that would go to the film festivals around the world. So he would say, it's given me, I'm financially secure because of Python being internationally popular, and B, I'm asked to go to, sort of like Zurich or, sort of like, Botswana land or something, just to sort of like, they run Life of Brian usually, and I'm there to talk about it. So he was very proud of that. And of course, we mentioned Personal Services. He made other feature films too. He was very proud of The Wind in the Willows.
Which I remember watching that.
An amazing
I went to
film.
see that as a young teenager, right?
Well, I mean, 96.
96, yeah. I went with my best friend, and it was a very, very empty screening on a Saturday morning. A bunch of kids down near the front, us right at the back, chortling away at all the stuff that's went over the kids' heads.
Yeah. It's a very adult script, actually, because Terry wrote it as well. And I think the problem was there was the Alan Bennett version, which played at the National Theatre very successfully with Jeremy Syndon was a brilliant Toad of Toad Hall in that. And I think I think Disney was trying to do a film of that play at the same time that Terry's came out, and there was some sort of distribution angst going on, and it didn't get the exposure that he wanted it to.
Yeah.
He was so proud, and I think his performance as Toad is just magnificent. I mean, he's having the best time, and in his house. He had, I think in the film actually it's a prop, but it's a huge sort of like portrait of him as Toad, and he had that propped in his house. I remember he had two he had of himself. He had an amazing original Charlie Chaplin poster, which is probably worth more than my house. But the poster, he had this screen. He didn't have a TV, Terry. He had a screening room, so he would run films on a big screen in this, and he had this amazing Chaplin poster in there. But he had this Wind in the Willow portrait. He also had a portrait which was done in the late 90s, early 2000s. He was famous for being the naked organist in Python. He reposed in his dotage, naked, sat at a keyboard, and he had that portrait in his house too.
I've seen photographs of that one.
There you go, and yes, it was quite a thing. But he made other. I mean, he bless him. He made a film in 2015 called Absolutely Anything, which was a script he had knocking around for ages and couldn't get the money for it. And I think his son, Bill Jones, who's a film producer and writer and very, very talented young man, he got the budget for it. So that was Terry's last feature film as director. Simon Pegg starred, and he called a lot of mates in. I mean, Jonah Lumley's in it, and
last Robin Williams performance.
Last Robin Williams is the voice of the dog, exactly, yes. Yeah. And all the Pythons came back, even Eric. Amazingly,
after quite a bit of adverse publicity, I remember about that.
Yeah, it was a tricky one because they were the voice of the aliens in it,
and they are billed as well on the poster, which
they're billed
and
they're billed just as Monty Python, not as individuals. It was an interesting thing. So it's just the voices, and basically the plot is it's a pastiche of the H.G. Wells novello, The Man Who Could Work Miracles, is the idea. So basically. Or Bruce Almighty's another sort of version on that. It's basically, not the gods this time, but this group of aliens just pick on some random idiot, which is Simon Pegg, and he has the ability to do absolutely anything, which is the film. And it's worth seeing. If you ever see it, you'll probably see it in CEX for 50 pence. Buy it. It's fun.
I think I've got 2 copies of
it. Okay, there you go. And Terry's also in it. He pops up as the cab driver in it, very briefly. But it's a fun film, and that was his last film directorial assignment, and the last thing he actually directed, I'm going to blow my trumpet again, like I always do that. Indeed, thank you. No, not carry on this time. He directed a play that I wrote about Marty Feldman and Loretta Feldman called Jeepers Creepers, and that was a play on the stage which he directed in 2016. And he wasn't well, to be honest. He wasn't up to it really, but he did it because he wanted to do it. And we got through it. It was a really quick rehearsal schedule. I think we had 10 days rehearsal for it. but it was fun, and there were moments. I mean, you know, he was socially, he was still with us, and he could still talk then. I mean, this awful dementia, forgive me, it's frontal temporal. It's basically affects your speech.
Yeah.
And you have the thoughts. You know what you want to say, but you just can't. The brain doesn't. Synapses don't sort of connect, and you can't express yourself. So he got to the point when he was really getting quite frustrated and just was, you know. And then eventually, I mean, I saw him just before Christmas, and it was, yeah, not fun. You'd get a spark of recognition, and then it would just go. Mm-hmm. But in 2016, he could still communicate, and he could still, but he wasn't peak Terry, bless him. But he did it, and you know, we got it on the stage, and it was his last thing, and it was fun to do that. With him, but yeah,
it was a lovely little piece. I mean,
yeah, well, thank you. You saw it, of course you saw it.
Yeah,
you saw it. Yeah, it's something I'm very proud of, and also because Terry and Michael Palin, actually all the Pythons apart from Terry Gilliam, they'd all written for Marty Feldman back in the late '60s. Mm-hmm. Literally just before Python hit, they were writing "It's Marty." So a lot of those sketches, and I think that's probably what inspired them. That and another show that Michael and Terry did called The Complete and Utter History of Britain, mm-hmm. which they were in, but the sort of studio stuff, it's very Python. In fact, they take moments of history, but they retell it in the form of maybe like a post-football match, interview on TV, or they have like sort of game shows, like the Battle of Hastings, but it's a game show. It's that sort of format. And an actor called Roddy. Oh God, what was his name? Maud Roxby, I think. Roddy Maud Roxby was the actor that basically does the sort of the presenting, you know. And now we're going to go over to 1066. And Terry thought he wasn't really that brilliant. I mean, actually looking at it again later when they did some links for the network DVD release of it, he actually said, actually Roddy was pretty good. I was being unfair, I think, but I was like 26 and arrogant, and I think actually now it's okay. But that show, but particularly there was a sketch they wrote for Marty Feldman about Marty is like a goblin or an elf going to get a mortgage for Dingley Dell or something, and John Junkin is the mortgage provider. And apparently, because he did it in front of a live audience, the Marty show, apparently he panicked at the sketch before he went out, and he went out and just saw the audience and started doing a load of gnome jokes, and completely off-piste of the script that Terry and Mike had written. And Terry was furious, at the time, saying, "What the hell is he doing? He's ruining our sketch." And he said, then that was the moment I thought we've got to do our own stuff. We write it and we perform it. That was the seed of Python, I suppose. But because he was very grateful to Marty, and also David Frost has been mentioned a few times at the Slapstick this weekend as a sort of a catalyst for talent. On the Frost Report, he had a long list of writers. I mean, but the two head honchos really were Barry Cryer and Marty Feldman. They were the head sort of people who kept all these young Oxbridge graduates, including the 5 British Pythons, all 3 goodies, Jonathan Lynn, Anthony Jay, loads of writers. I mean, all the brilliant brains of the 60s were writing this show. But Terry and Mike always told me that the 2 people that really embraced them when they went into that, as callow sort of 24-year-olds to go and meet this behemoth that was David Frost. The 2 that came over and said, "Hello, do you want a cup of tea?" were Baz Cryer and Marty Feldman, who really sort of took them under their wing. So Terry always felt he owed him a favour. So that's why he directed this play. But yeah, so I mean, but another, I mean, we're not even touched on the books really. I mean, we mentioned the Chaucer one, Chaucer's Night, but he wrote books for children. The Saga of Eric the Viking. He wrote a collection of short stories called Evil Machines, which is basically just like toasters and sort of traffic meters, becoming animated and going crazy, which was based on an opera he'd written.
That's the one published by Unbound, isn't it?
Unbound, and Unbound. The very first Unbound book. Because if you get the Unbound books, they're all. And number 1 is Evil Machines by Terry Jones. Yeah. And it was because of Terry. I was a bit sort of reluctant to go down the crowdfunding route. So I always thought, oh, that's a bit naff, you know.
You've always been with traditional publishers, haven't you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm an old-fashioned person. But now, of course, you can sort of do Vanity Press, or you can sort of like desktop publish or whatever, and there's no shame in it at all. Although I still prefer a proper publisher. But it was Terry that said, look, we can't get a publisher for this Forgotten Heroes of Comedy. Why don't you go to this Unbound, this crowd? I said, oh, really? Look, I'm doing it. I go, okay, it's good enough for Terry Jones. It's good enough for me, and I think a lot of writers felt that, and they've got some really good names on there now, and because of Terry, and people like Justin Pollard, who sort of are the organisers of Unbound, you know, will always cite Terry Jones as the sort of the flag bearer for that company. So yeah,
I mean you've touched on it already, and it's something that I only kind of briefly mentioned when I was doing the BBC stuff this week. Was in terms of Terry's role as an archivist. But it's Terry actually that we've got to thank, I believe, for Monty Python even existing, in terms of after it aired.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's come out again in some very well written. There's a friend of mine, Eddie Robson, did a piece about Terry, pretty much claiming that he was the most important Python in terms of the structure of it, and in terms of the sort of the driving force of it, and as I mentioned before, the archivist of it. But yeah, I mean, he went to the BBC, you know, because in those days, I mean, you know, you've got to forgive them. I mean, what the policy I think was they show it and they may get one repeat, and then after that, who cares?
Yeah, it gets junked.
It gets junked. So we know, you know, so much of Till Death Us Do Part and Hancock's Half Hour when it went to from live to recorded. Steptoe & Son. All these shows, they were not considered, you know, and why would they be? You know, I mean, bizarrely they would keep certain things that they'd keep, like, you know, a 1967 performance of Mozart or something because it was considered culturally important, but they would wipe, I don't know, twice a fortnight with the pre-goodies or something, you know.
So it was culturally important, or it was the sample episodes. You got a random sample.
You get a sample
just to show this is what we did.
Yeah, they did that with Doctor Who, for example. They would keep like episode 2 of a 6-part Patrick Troughton story. So what's the point of that, you know? But just as an example. So, but the thing is, I think John Cleese said this because they watched a lot of John Cleese's early stuff. You know, a 1967 performance of Mozart is exactly the same as a 2017 version of Mozart. It's the same thing. Whereas, you know, you can't replicate Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. You know, you can't replicate Tony Hancock. You know, although they tried, but the original stuff is always the best. So Terry was the one that went in and basically just got all the rules of film. He had them in his house. I've held these cans of original Monty Python. And it was also Terry, Nancy Lewis, I mentioned before about the American thing, but Terry was the one that was so passionate about when they were shown on American TV, they would tend to like cut them up into compilations.
Yes.
So they would lose sometimes a lot of Terry Gilliam's animation, for example, and they would lose the sense of it. They would lose that wonderful. My favourite Python character is Michael Palin as the It's Man. I think it's just a treat. And it was you, wasn't it? Because he just did Wurzel Gummidge.
Yeah.
And he looks like the It's Man now. He's got to the age. It's a bit like Robin Ince was mentioning this morning with Bill Oddie's animation thing about the sequel to Mary Poppins, where Dick Van Dyke comes back playing the same old man character he also played in the original Mary Poppins, but now he's 93 and he can play it without makeup now. Michael Palin now looks like the It's Man in this Wurzel Gummidge. What's his character? It's not the Crow Man. It's the Green Man. He's playing the Green Man in it. He's basically the Geoffrey Belden equivalent. He's the creator of the custodian of all the scarecrows. It's gorgeous, by the way. If you haven't seen the Mackenzie Crook Wurzel Gummidge, it's an absolute treat. I loved it. With music by the Unthanks, who I adore as well, proper British folk duo. Anyway, I digress. But Mike's in it now, and he looks like the It's Man. And I think he was on. I heard someone told me he was on BBC Breakfast as a sort of like a location report just before they broadcast it. I think it was Boxing Day it went out, the first episode. So a couple of days before Christmas, I think they had this thing on. And I was on the way to London, and a friend of mine texted me and said, "Did you see Michael Palin?" I said, "No, I missed it. And he said, he said It's." And I put this out into the glorious world of Twitter, and it was you, Robert, that had got the clip. And bugging me, he's there, you know, in his persona as this Wurzel Gummidge character, this Green Man or Crow Man, whatever he plays. And he says, and it cuts from 1969 Mike doing it to 2019 Mike, and it's an absolute treat. So yeah, it's. But yeah, so I think, but it was Terry that basically said to the Americans, you know, you cannot cut our work. This is a stream of consciousness, and with Gilliam's animation that sort of ties it all up, and we got, you know, Graham Chapman coming in and saying, stop that, it's getting silly and all that, and it doesn't work if you cut it up. So yeah, he was very passionate about it, and I think of all the Pythons, he was the one that was so happy to do the O2 shows in 2014. Now, those close to him, we were seeing something wasn't quite up with it then. It wasn't disclosed. No one knew what it was, and he got quite scared about what it was. Actually, he thought he was just sort of going a bit doolally. And I would sit down in the pub with him, and I had a notebook like this, and he would ask me to make notes. And he said, "Look, Rob, if I lose my thread at all, if I, you know, just will you just make a note about what we were talking about when I lost my thread, because I'm trying to work out what." Okay. So he wasn't quite sure what it was.
But he was aware himself.
He was aware. Oh God, he was aware of it. Yeah. And
so, I mean, I remember as a viewing member of the public watching the O2 show that went out, and I could see that Terry wasn't getting it in the way that he would have done any time before. No, and there were certain things, the Crunchy Frog sketch, for example. Yes. Where he's basically the confectionery maker with this crunchy frog, and it's dipped in the finest milk chocolate and all that thing. And it's a long old list of ingredients and stuff. And it's really, you know, and he would have on the actual, I remember seeing the prop, it was a box of chocolates, and on the inside lid of it was the script. Yeah. And, you know, he was reading, fair enough. Sometimes Cleese or Gilliam would be, and they didn't know what was going on. They just thought, oh, silly old bugger sort of thing. And they'd sometimes rip this thing off and chuck the lid into the audience. And then Terry was completely, you know, scuppered. You know, and Eric who also directed it, Eric Idle directed it, and he was getting quite angry with Terry. And it opened with the Four Yorkshiremen sketch, which, as Tim Brooke Taylor has been saying this weekend, was a last 1948 show. So Tim and Marty Feldman wrote that with John Cleese and Graham Chapman. And it was sort of brought, like a lot of the last 48 show stuff was taken into the Python's bosom because it was sort of lost or not really known about. So when they were touring America or doing the Hollywood Bowl shows, they would do quite a lot of 48 show routines and stuff. Contractual Obligation album, there's a lot of that on there. The bookshop sketch they showed, that's in there, certainly, yeah. And Four Yorkshiremen became an inverted commas Python sketch, much to the chagrin of Tim particularly. But they opened the O2 show with the Four Yorkshiremen, and it was Eric, Cleese, Mike, and Terry. Terry J. I think there's the four of them, and they beautifully had a fifth brandy glass for Graham as a sort of tribute to Graham because he'd originally done the sketch in 1967. And there were points where Terry lost his lines on that. And I remember because I saw the show, I think, 6 times out of the 10, beaten only by Eddie Izzard, who saw it 8 times, I think. But I was at the first and last for sure. But what they did, again, much to Eric Idle's anger, they wanted to do 10 shows. They were going to do 1 originally, then they did 10. And they did a bank of 5 with a break and then another 5. So I remember I was in the pub with Terry after the first 5, and he was getting quite upset about the fact he was losing his lines. You know, he was forgetting these lines. So me being a comedy obsessive, no, pretty much verbatim the Four Yorkshiremen. So I was playing the 3, and I was sort of giving, and we did the sketch. I remember that I can see us doing it. We had a bottle of wine on a I don't know, whatever it was, a Tuesday afternoon, and on his week off from the Python O2 shows, and we did the sketch, and he was word perfect. And I said, well, look, you know it, Terry, you know. He goes, yeah, but there's 60,000 people out there when I do it, you know. I said, fair point. So he was aware of it, certainly. But yeah, they were joyous shows, and again, a lot of the press were quite scathing about these old men just doing this show for the money, and one of the things I really love about the Pythons is that they're completely upfront about it, that they're doing stuff for the cash, you know, and John and Eric in particular.
John and Eric, particularly Eric. Well, John's got so many divorces to sort of cover, and
he's got so much tour was one that John did, and then Eric was the Goody Bastard tour.
That's it, yeah. But it's fun. It's funny. I mean, you know, and they had this whole thing because of Spamalot and because of a person who will remain nameless who staked a claim in the Monty Python and the Holy Grail film, which obviously is the basis of Spamalot. And he won a lot of money, and it was pure and simple. In order to recoup that loss, they did the live shows, and Terry Jones said he might pay my mortgage off. That's what I'm doing it for, which he didn't quite, bless him. But he got a few quid. But it was yeah. And they're honest about it. But also it was just tremendous. I mean, it was a whole, you saw it, whole production numbers and musical numbers that Eric loves so much, and it was funny. I mean, they could still do it, you know. When Mike Palin and John Cleese do the Dead Parrot sketch together, it's just a joy. I mean, we're all sort of like chanting along to the lines, you know. And John would. There's a bit. What is it? There's a line in it where he basically would change the name every single show. And on the very last show, he said, and as Dr. Chapman said to me, and it was that got a huge round because Graham was there on film and in spirit. So they always would say, when Graham died in '89, they said, that's it. Without the six of us together, we can't do anything. So they would do sort of compilations and documentaries and stuff like that. And obviously, thanks to film, Graham was there. So it was a little on the poster, I think, it's a little sort of greyed out Graham in the clouds, and then the five of them in their sort of Gumby suits, and it was 1 down, 5 to go, and of course John Cleese's tweet when Terry died was 2 down, 4 to go. So it's even in death. I mean, that's the whole thing about Python. There's no boundaries. They can be as bad taste as they want to be, and it's and I mean Terry saw the funny side of the whole dementia in the end. I mean, once he knew what it was. Mm-hmm. He became a sort of bit of a champion for that, and he would go on marches and stuff. But then, you know, in the early days when he was still just about firing on it, but then it got really, really tough, and it was, yeah. But, you know, it was, I would, bizarrely enough, when he couldn't really speak that much, we would sit around his place in Highgate Village and watch silent films. He was a massive champion of mm-hmm. particularly Buster Keaton. And Charlie Chaplin. He would love to watch silent films. And I remember he was sitting there holding hands, just watching films with him, and he would sort of laugh in the funny bits and cry in the sad bits, and he would just sort of look at me and just like sort of beaming, you know, and just because he could relate to that silent world even more so than when he was a kid. It was very, very beautiful actually. So he was, yeah, he loved his films, he loved his real ale. He loved his food. My God, he loved his food. He was one of those people, you know, anybody else, you'd get really annoyed with this person. But let's say there's like a table of 8 of us, and we've all got our Indian takeaway delivered to Terry's house, and he would be one of those people dipping into everybody's dish. So what's yours like, Rob? Okay, that's fine. You know,
one of them.
Because he didn't want to miss out on anything. And before I went vegan, I was meat eater first, and then I became vegetarian, then I was vegan. But so when I was eating meat. When I first knew Terry, and fish, for example. So people don't. This is very dull, but if you're a real ale fan, you'll know this. That to keep the brew fresh and lively, they put a thing called isinglass in it, which basically isinglass is fish guts. They put in the barrel. No, they do. They put. I know Robert's is putting a face here.
I know,
but it's true.
I eat meat.
No. They put. It's to keep the beer. It makes it taste better, basically.
Uh-huh.
It keeps it longer in the barrel. If you buy bottled beer, it's not in it because it's got the fizz. Yeah. Right. The bottle does the job of the isinglass. But if you on tap pints, most pints, some don't. There's a brewery called Black Sheep Brewery that do a vegan version.
And some Monty Python themed drinks.
There you go.
I've ordered them
They
before,
do the Monty Python Holy Ale, isn't it? That's it, yeah? That's a vegan one. But when I was drinking anything, which I did in the 90s with Terry, we would go through these pubs, and there was a microbrewery in one of these pubs. It might have been the Red Lion and Sun. It might have been. Anyway, one of the ones in Highgate had a microbrewery, and we would literally just work our way through of an evening, every single pint, and we'd just, is that one okay too? No, this one's nicer. Okay, we'll have 2 of those instead then, and then we'll stick on that one for a couple of rounds, and then we'll try that one afterwards. And it was, I mean, he loved consuming things. He loved movies, he loved books. He was a massive reader, and I mean, I read all the time, and some books are sort of classics, like. Brave New World I was reading. I remember Brave New World. I said, "You read this too?" He goes, "Yeah, I read it at university." I thought, "Yeah, of course you did." You know. But he would sort of, "Have you read this one?" I said, "No, I've not read that." So we would sort of swap books, and he liked to cook as well. He was a very good cook. So yeah, he was just a, you know. This is a very long. Robert knows me.
No.
I answer questions with essays, but I think because he is the Python, I suppose, with the less or the least amount of huge individual projects. He did so much stuff. He directed and he wrote.
Was he so wrong to say that he's the one without the huge? Because I mean, when I look at all the TVs, when I look at the historical books that he wrote, the TV series that accompanied those, that people have forgotten about.
Yeah.
When you look at
Crusaders
all the other things
and
that he
stuff,
has his hand in.
Yeah. Or Labyrinth. We haven't not mentioned Labyrinth, have we? He wrote the script for.
Well, the first script.
Yeah. And there's a lot of Cherry in it. I mean, there's a lot of. You know, you remind me of the Babe. That's so Cherry, all that, you know. And the little worm is so Cherry. He wrote a treatment or draft script for Gremlins 2.
Oh, you did it? I did not know that.
He wrote a script for that, which I saw in his archive. He wrote all sorts of things, and he would sort of lecture about medieval history very seriously, you know. But then again, I always think, you know, he would have been the greatest history teacher ever. You know, he was so enthusiastic, and those documentaries, which you know, they should be. Maybe, you know, it's always in death the BBC bring out the old stuff, and if they do repeat them, please watch them because they're just amazing. He did Gladiators, he did Crusades. There was a few. He did some brilliant documentaries about maps and canals and things. I mean, he just made everything fascinating. One of the last ones he did was about Chaplin for ITV, which is a beautiful documentary.
But maybe this is the thing. I mean, even though he didn't end up following that academic route down, he was able to introduce it in his work. So even something as simple as Holy Grail, where they're having that discussion about the way that, you know, you elect a government, essentially.
Yeah.
You know,
I am king. You know, I didn't vote for you, and all that. You know,
and, there are lessons there that I've taken through my life.
Because it was. I think there's a line. Is it Eric says it? I think, and Graham, beautiful performance as King Arthur. I mean, it's an absolute just. Brilliant performance. So sort of straight. He's like the sort of totem pole with all these crazies, you know, dancing around him, and he's riding through with his coconuts, you know, with Terry Gilliam. Is it Pansy? Patsy, doing his coconuts behind him, and he's going through. And Eric Idle looks at him and he says, "Oh, is that? Oh, it's the king." He goes, "Well, how do you know?" He's not covered in shit. So but no film up to that point. It had all been sort of very, you know, romanticised. It had been sort of Tony Curtis, you know. What's that famous line? "Yonder is the castle of my father," or whatever that line is. But it was all beautiful and glorious Technicolor. And for the first time, there was a film set in sort of medieval England that was murky and dirty and you know, people died. You know, it was proper history. Plus, it was really funny. And I think that was Terry's great gift, that he could sort of demystify these quite weighty texts and weighty, you know, historical sort of references, and make them understandable. And that was his great gift. He was so passionate about life, really. Yeah. So
I think it was the thing that was quoted most of the week about, you know, how Terry wanted to be remembered, and Terry said there was either maybe as a kid's author or, you know, for some of the history stuff that he did. For you, what's the Terry thing that you would most go to? If you're going to introduce someone to Terry Jones, what are you going to say? This is what you need to watch or read.
Oh gosh,
one project.
That's a good question. You can tell these aren't pre-organised, these questions.
I mean,
completely off the cuff conversation we have.
You mentioned a couple of times during the week about, you know, Terry ultimately had 3 of his films were banned in Ireland. Which was
one of his proudest achievements. But yeah, I must find out what the 4th one. I was thinking about it the other day because we both did a few radios, as you mentioned earlier. But one of his proudest achievements were that by the early 1990s, there were 4 films that had been banned in Ireland, and he directed 3 of them. So it was Monty Python's Life of Brian, Monty Python and the Meaning of Life, and Personal Services.
You can tell it's a very Catholic country.
There you go. So he was quite chuffed about that, and I suppose. Completely off piece there. I suppose I'm going to be greedy and take 2.
Okay.
You're
allowed. You're Britain's official comedy historian.
That's it. Yeah. I think The Wind in the Willows sort of encapsulates his complete joy of life and his sort of verve and vigour of just excess. So he was so much Toad of Toad Hall, Terry. He loved everything, and he loved the best in fine wines, and he loved, you know, good conversation. So I think as a sort of like a Sunday afternoon family film with quite a dark underbelly, I would suggest you watch the Wind in the Willows. And then, I mean, it's the greatest comedy film of all time. It's got to be Meaning of Life. No, sorry, Monty Python's Life of Brian. It's got to be Life of Brian because I did a thing Christmas last year, so December 2019, at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Of all things, I'm so chuffed to bring Python to the V&A, and I introduced the screening of Life of Brian as an alternative Christmas film. And the editor that was there, Julian Doyle, who worked on quite a lot of Terry's films actually, who's a lovely filmmaker in his own right. But we introduced this film to a packed V&A, you know, cinema screening room, and I not watched it for a few years, and I watched it with the audience, which helps a lot. Like these films we're watching this weekend, watching Lauren Hardy or Buster Keaton with an audience. It's just so
that observation I hadn't caught till Stephen Merchant was doing his thing last night with Robin Ince, and they were talking about how later on Stan Laurel would watch these movies and think they're a bit slow. It's because they're made to facilitate the audience laughter.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then you watch them in an audience and you say, oh my gosh, people do actually laugh.
Stan would watch them on TV allegedly and think, oh God, that needs a cut there. But no, with an audience, because you laugh, and then Ollie looks into the camera and you get another laugh. And Stan is sort of like, a bit like Terry Jones in that respect on the Python TV shows, which was Ian McNaughton directing. You have people like Jimmy Parrott directing the Lauren Hardy shorts, but Stan's behind him, you know, knowing exactly what's going on. And Terry was that equivalent. You know, that's why he directed the films later. But yeah, you're right. So that slow burn of Ollie, and then a laugh, and you've got like a good 4 seconds of nothing laughter when you're watching it with an audience, and then you get a belter afterwards. And that's Life of Brian. I mean, I always cite that. I think it always gets voted, as I mentioned earlier, the #1 film, comedy film of all time. But watching it with that audience, December 19, it's perfection. It's literally. I'm getting quite emotional now. But it's perfection. There's not a bit in it that's dead wood. It's absolutely great, and the script just sings, and even the craziness of that sort of Star Wars madness that happens, you know, and that it's just ridiculous. And that works. And Star Wars is now a thing that has never gone away either. So that reference still works. You can watch it 41 years on, and it still makes sense, that Star Wars reference. So it's just a great thing. So I think those two films, if you want to sort of celebrate Terry Jones as a filmmaker, which he's one of the, I think for me, one of Britain's great filmmakers, then Wind in the Willows, followed by a bit of naughtiness, Monty Python's Life of Brian.
This has been a very food-oriented conversation.
We should go for lunch now.
What was the thing of that? You mentioned a white wine that.
Yes,
what was it?
Pitbull. It's a French white wine, and it's beautiful.
Any of our regulars will know. It was when we did the show with Richard Elfman. Richard was he did me a whole barbecue, and you know, was recommending cigars and whiskies.
Oh, okay. Oh,
so
no,
it was lovely. So this is in that tradition of.
I'll tell you, because when I remember you came to Jeepers Creepers. Which was in 2016.
Yes.
And my ex, who's an actor, played Loretta, Rebecca Vaughan, who's very good. And David Boyle played Marty Feldman. But when you came, and your friend came as well.
Yes, I went with Jen.
Yes, yeah. And I'm a member of a club called Two Bridges, which is just opposite the National Portrait Gallery in Charing Cross in London. And Terry Jones was a founder member of that. And it was down to Terry that I got membership, because it's a long waiting list. Yeah. I got sort of fast track, because you're supposed to have, I think 3 recommendations from members.
Wow.
And Terry said, I just signed this and I'm in, right? And it was in there, I was going in there with Terry for, years. Probably 15 years or so. And it was in there that he said, they do a really nice wine in there. I said, yeah, okay, go on. And this is Pitbull wine. P-I-C-P-O-U-L, Pitbull. French wine, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So every time I'm in there, either without Terry or with Terry, I'd always have that wine. So when I'm next in there, which I'm actually there next on February the 4th, with my good friend Tyler Butterworth, who's the son of Peter Butterworth and Janet Brown, and it's actually Peter's birthday. So we're going to celebrate his late dad's birthday, February the 4th, and I will get a bottle of Pitbull and toast Terry. There we go.
Oh, lovely. Rob, Thank you very much. I know this has not been an easy week. I mean, we've talked, you and I have talked before about the nature of what we do and talking about dead people, and it's always a bit of a shock when it's
yes.
one of your friends that goes. But this is one of those cases where it actually has been a friend.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you kind of.
I will sing Terry's praises happily for anybody, but especially for you, Robert. I do enjoy chatting to you, and we're going to go off for a glass of something. Hopefully we'll find some people.
We'll find some people.
But we'll find something.
Anyway, yeah.
But it's been a joy. Thank you so much for asking me.
Thank you, and you know, folks, you can find Robert online. You're on Twitter at Robert W. Ross-esque.
Esquire, it's actually ESQ, but the website is robertross.co.uk, and if you just Google Robert Ross and carry on, you'll find me popping up all over. So I'm very easy to find on social media, I mean, Instagram and Facebook and all those. So yes, please come and say hello. I am. You've got to do it, right? You know, I'm no shrinking violet, as you won't.
Rob, thanks very much, and let's go to the pub.
Let's do it. Thank you. Hooray!